Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Max Verstappen wins the Japanese Grand Prix in another Red Bull 1-2, but it's Mercedes again after a relatively promising qualifying session that fell away from them in terms of performance in the different track conditions on the Sunday. Lewis Hamilton especially frustrated with the strategy from Mercedes, but also reportedly walking out of a press conference when asked if he's jealous of what Ferrari are currently enjoying. Very much enjoy to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Let's dive straight in. This is the start of the Grand Prix. Start number 1. The big talking point at the start was a collision at the back. So here we have the two RB cars, both getting poor launches. We've got, well, basically everyone comes past them off the launch here, and they may be somewhat fortunate that it got red flagged and the order went back to kind of how it was. But Ricciardo and Alex Albon find themselves in the wall, and of the two drivers to crash, I'm not gonna lie, these were like the two worst drivers to crash in the sense that Ricciardo has had a bad time lately. He didn't need this. And Williams as a team, they most certainly didn't need this. They're poor engineers, man. It must be fighting for their lives over there because on mechanics, right? Because they've got to repair this chassis again. This was the onboard here from Alex Albon. So it's, I think, a racing instance. Probably if there was anyone more at fault, probably Daniel, but, you know, there was a car on his inside and Ricciardo thought that it was clear. He didn't expect Albon to be in this position that he's in. This is just after the contact was made, after Ricciardo pulls off to the right-hand side to take the racing line. He didn't know Albon was here. Sure, he should have checked for him, but, you know, sometimes you go 3 wide. It's turn 2, Suzuka, lap 1. I think generally these are seen as kind of racing incidents. It's unfortunate. Should Ricciardo have had better awareness? Probably. Should Albon have maybe seen this one coming and not put his car in that spot? Arguably also yes. So, you know, I think to me this is kind of a 50-50 one, but and in the end there was no further action for this. But it's just, you know, especially on Ricciardo's side, an issue that you really can't afford to have happen. The same thing is also true to some degree for the Williams because, you know, Albon's chassis has been through the ringer, really. Their entire team has been through the ringer. They had the crash of Albon's car back in Australia. Then Albon ran Logan's car. That has now been repaired. Logan got it back. Then he crashed the new car. They had to make some repairs on the gearbox and stuff. Now Albon's in the wall. And then Sargent was off the track later in the Grand Prix as well. Yeah, it's tough. And apparently, yes, the chassis is damaged. It's going to go back to the Williams factory and then they're going to repair it for China. So, yeah, I don't know if that's going to scupper their plans or push back their plans for having a spare chassis when they could possibly make one. But it ain't ideal for all parties. And it's just more crash damage for those teams to deal with. But Ricciardo, this was an important weekend for him in the sense that it's just been his home race in Australia. Yuki crushed him all weekends. Then he comes out here to Yuki's home race, and of course, you know, he needs to get the revenge to some degree. Qualifying was fine. Sure, Yuki outplaced him. He made Q3 Yuki, but they were next to each other on the grid. Ricciardo was only half a tenth down. Not too bad. But then crashing out like that in the Grand Prix, especially when Yuki goes on to get points in the race, that is the reason why we see pictures such as this floating around as they currently are doing on social media with Mr. Liam Lawson having a look at Danny Rick and, well, eyeing up his seat, I could well imagine as it stands. But as the race continues, the restart happens. Max is out in front. Perez, you know, gets close a little bit, but then he went wide in the second Degner, and that was it for his challenge for the rest of the Grand Prix. The real battle I thought was going to be, could the Ferraris make enough progress? Because our feeling was that the Ferraris had comparable race pace to the Red Bulls, or at least not too far off. Seemed to me the Ferrari was the second strongest car in race trim, and that certainly proved to be the case today. But the question was, could Sainz actually get Norris, and what could Leclerc do from further back? Now, Lewis Hamilton was having a tough time. The start happened, and if you guys saw this during the first part of the S's, him and Charles Leclerc came very close together, and it seems like they did touch, because Hamilton says that, yeah, basically they touched. I think I picked up a bit of damage on the beginning, you know, instant with Charles. Of course, his former teammate, I had huge understeer for the first stint, couldn't turn the car in any of the corners, that's why I let George by. So whether he had damage or not, who knows, but you know, him and George were kind of nip and tuck, but he felt like he would just get out of the way and let George go on, because he felt that he had, you know, damage in the car and he just wasn't able to deliver the performance, so thought he'd let Russell get on with his Grand Prix. In the end, that may have just been to do with the fact that those hard tyres were not really a good race tyre today, certainly on the Mercedes car, and that was the strategy they went for. After the red flag, they decided to go hard, hoping they could make it to the end. They couldn't make it to the end. There was, however, one team that could manage a one-stop, and we'll discuss them in a second, which is So impressive to me that that's Ferrari, the team we're talking about, being able to make the one-stop work, specifically, of course, Charles Leclerc. So, and in the end, when the fuel load was lower on the medium tyres towards the end of the Grand Prix, Hamilton was flying, actually, so maybe there was no damage after all. But this was a stint in the race when, well, basically, the Mercedes were sitting ducks because everyone had pitted, the Mercedes were planning to do this one-stop race. Everyone else was going to have to pit again, but even then, it just wasn't looking good for Mercator, and there was just no real pace in that first stint. Also, Max Verstappen, he drops back. This is an overtaker on Charles Leclerc. So Leclerc was doing a stellar job. He, of course, started P8, went for a very long stint on the mediums, and was able to make it work with incredibly good tyre degradation here. So this is what Mercedes used to have in their locker back in the W13 days in 2022. That car was very good on its tyres compared to its competition. Probably not quite as good as the Red Bull, but certainly better than the Ferrari that year. At least generally speaking, the Ferrari was a faster car, but the W13 was pretty much better on its tyres at most tracks they went to, certainly towards the end of the season, and that gave Mercedes an edge. This year, that does not seem to be the case because neither Hamilton nor Russell had any hope of making it hard to the end of the race. The tyre wasn't very good, and the strategy they'd elected wasn't good either. This is the thing for Mercedes. There is an argument to make that their strategy has actually never been that good, and it was just masked by, the brilliance of Hamilton and their machinery for the years they won all the championships. There were some times in that period they made great strategy calls. There were other times in that period they made highly questionable strategy calls, and I feel like we are now seeing that really come to the forefront, right? Because Hamilton was on the radio furious, like, guys, this strategy ain't going to work. These tyres are dead, and they're very slow. I'm a sitting duck here, getting overtaken by anyone. Like, we've got to change our minds. Eventually, they did. They went for the two-stop strategy, as we'll see here. And on lap 35, this was the situation where there was actually a lot of action here. Despite the fact that a race at the front wasn't massively engaging, there was an interesting battle in the pit stops from like 9th down to like 15th pretty much, when anything was realistically possible. Sargent, by the way, he was nearly in the wall, but he wasn't quite. He kept it out of the wall, but he did put his Williams off at the second Degner, which is, yeah, maybe there's some damage to the chassis. He just had a tough weekend because he was having an okay race up to that point, which was kind of unfortunate. Towards the end then, Carlos Sainz gets the job done on Charles Leclerc. So Charles Leclerc obviously went for the one stop, and I thought did an incredibly good job and well-deserving, I thought, drive through the day, getting this one stop to the end of the race. Carlos Sainz, though, comes around the outside, secures that podium position, and honestly, of all the races that Sainz has started this season, he has finished on the podium. There was also this moment on the final lap, and it's funny, isn't it, how you put Russell on the final lap of a Grand Prix. Who knows what's going to happen, just get out this guy's way because he is coming through. He sends a big dive bomb here on Oscar Piastri, and maybe Piastri had enough room here. Very borderline one. Big lunge. Definitely sent it hard on Piastri. And Piastri cut the runoff area and stayed ahead. This was eventually deemed a no further action incident. And difficult to say exactly what the rulebook would say on this one. But it was interesting nonetheless. It didn't really matter because the next lap Piastri made a mistake. Russell was able to get by. And Alonso, in the same way, to using... I wouldn't say this was dirty tricks, obviously. This is just smart racing. But back in Australia, when the Russell crash happened and he slowed down deliberately to, throw Russell off, Alonso here was intentionally giving Piastri DRS to ensure that he would stay ahead, and because the Mercedes at the end of the race was actually fast, and this is the confusing thing for Mercedes, is that again, when the conditions were super hot at the start of the Grand Prix, they were terrible, but as the fuel gets lighter and as the temperatures get lower a little bit and they're on the medium tyres, all of a sudden their car was actually really competitive. So Mercedes, I'm sure, are still completely mind-blown as to what is going on with their car right now, and Hamilton goes from yesterday saying that it was the best the car had felt to today saying, the car was pretty bad, apart from the end of the race. And Alonso, I thought it was pretty funny. I don't know what to say after Australia. Maybe they disqualify me for the entire championship for that move that he pulls, but congrats to Yuki Tsunoda as well, the first Japanese driver in 12 years to score points at his home race. The Japanese, the Grand Prix is so good in Suzuka. I know today's race maybe wasn't spectacular, and that's a trend this season based on the regulations and the tyres and all the other things we've discussed in length over the last several weeks on this channel. But the fans, the track, Suzuka has it all to me, and it's great to see Yuki get points at his home race for the first time ever. Red Bull, though, they dominated the weekend, and this was absolutely expected. I told you guys before the weekend began, if Ferrari can be 3/10 from Red Bull this weekend, that is a very impressive performance. They were 3/10 pretty much from Red Bull on race pace today, and we'll discuss what that might mean here in a second. But for some reason, not even for some reason, the Red Bull's great everywhere. It's especially good at these like high-speed corners. The stability of the platform, the amount of downforce the floor is able to generate, it's so good at Suzuka. And Max has just dominated this race for the last 3 years now. Qualified 1-2, finished 1-2. Fair play to Perez as well. Like, I think Perez has done an admirable job so far this season. Sure, couldn't really get close to Max today, but he is doing whatever is really necessary to try and keep his spot at the team. You know, he's basically admitting, sure, I'm a number 2 driver. I'll take that for now, and I'll do what I can and try and win a race when the opportunity presents. Will they still get rid of him? I still think it's more likely than not, and we'll discuss why in just a couple of seconds. But this was the overall classification here. So Verstappen from Perez. Sainz was the closest car that wasn't a Red Bull, 20 odd seconds back. Now, he was caught up in traffic for some time, so maybe that gap is slightly smaller. But the gap last year from Verstappen to Norris, who was P3 or P2, whatever it was, last year, the second place car anyway, yeah, it was P2, wasn't it? Because Perez was nowhere to be found in last year's Grand Prix. That was 19 seconds. So this year, the McLaren actually went backwards with respect to last year's car. But the Mercedes boys finishing 45, 46 seconds behind, pretty much a second a lap. And of course, was Verstappen pushing the absolute limit? Unlikely. These were then the driver race pace adjusted race pace rankings. So Verstappen the fastest, Perez around 3/10 behind. But then Charles Leclerc was on the day the third fastest driver, the fastest driver that wasn't in a Red Bull, 3.5 tenths back, and this to me is quite impressive for Ferrari, and certainly in race trim. Yes, their quali wasn't the best, but this is a circuit that absolutely suits the Red Bull to a T, and they brought upgrades this weekend, Red Bull, and Newey confirmed, yep, we brought the upgrades, they did what we thought they'd do, they gave us a small performance improvement. Maybe that's a tenth, maybe that's a tenth and a half, maybe they'll say over the coming days. But for Ferrari not to have really brought any changes, and to still be 3/10, I would say pretty much off where Verstappen was, to me that is very impressive. And Leclerc's performance today was very, very good. Norris was great as well. The Alpines, I think they had damage, apparently, but honestly, who even cares anymore? And this is just one of those circuits that absolutely exacerbates the performance delta between these cars. This, though, was the tyre deg numbers. So we can see here that despite running the hard tyre a couple of times, both Mercedes were struggling with deg. This is average deg in seconds per lap. Leclerc had by far the least deg on the entire grid. And even Verstappen was pretty much in the middle of the field. So it is clear, this is now a trend for a couple of races. The Red Bull is an absolutely dominant machine, no doubt, but it's not entirely untouchable. Like, it isn't the best in every single category, as arguably it was last year. Now, obviously, Leclerc's tyre deg, there's a bit of things to consider just because he did a one-stop and therefore he has to do more management. But he said after the Grand Prix that, you know, people gas up my one-lap pace, but, you know, put some respect on my name. He didn't say that because he's Charles Leclerc and he's softly spoken, right? But I think what he was implying was, look, come on, I'm a good race driver as well, and this is proving, I would say, exactly that. And I mean, look, Magnussen was the second, you know, was the next driver. They had a great onboard cam, by the way, Magnussen as well. Like, for some reason, whatever onboard cam they had on Magnussen, the camera angle and the frame rate made it look way faster than a normal onboard camera. So we need more of that for sure. But Magnussen in a Haas, their tyre deg was shocking before, and now the Ferrari is better, the Haas therefore gets better, they've made progress themselves, and this is what we find. So I think that's quite fascinating for the rest of the year. I think Red Bull, if Perez performs, Red Bull will always go to 1-2 this weekend. But I think that in terms of some interesting races for the rest of the season, to me, we are going to get them. I mean, Ferrari improved dramatically with respect to Red Bull from this year to last year. The same is true for Aston. The same is true a little bit for Mercedes. But actually, McLaren went the other way, which is definitely a concern for them. And Piastri's performance wasn't exactly great either. And Norris just didn't have the pace to hold back the likes of Carlos Sainz. Marco as well from Red Bull, very impressed by Yuki Tsunoda's performance here. That makes him the first Japanese driver in 12 years to score a point. His mistakes and lack of control are a thing of the past. He has really improved. So Marco loves Tsunoda. I love Tsunoda. He's a lovable driver and a very good driver at that. Question would be, where does he go next? Will he actually get the Red Bull seat? That still seems very unlikely because we have the likes of Carlos Sainz in consideration. They could keep Perez, but if Sainz is available and if the whole Sainz-Verstappen internal dynamics are going to be not considered as relevant based on various Christian Horner power-related reasons, then this is very plausible. Sainz has talked about, you know, again, look, here I am on the podium, guys, and I know how to drive fast. Leclerc was probably driver of the day for me, be, but, Carlos did very well. Now, Will Buxton actually said, so I talked about this 2 days ago now, that Toto Wolff had implied there was a big driver signing coming soon. He said that, some of the big guys are signing with some big teams in the very near future, and based on various speculation, I theorise that it was quite possibly Sainz to Red Bull, and other people have drawn similar conclusions. Will Buxton actually says that he thinks it is Carlos as well. Now, whether that's Carlos to Red Bull or Carlos somewhere else is another question, but where else actually makes sense? It ain't Ferrari, obviously, because he's coming from there. Could be Mercedes, is possible, but would he want to join Mercedes, especially given the fact that Toto Wolff is seemingly hell-bent on putting Antonelli in the car? Could be Aston, but looks like Stroll's going to probably stay, and so is Alonso. So it narrows down the possibilities, and Helmut Marko was also giving Sainz credit for his performance this weekend as well. And Sainz even goes on to say that, look, we can't forget that Red Bull brought an upgrade this weekend. We didn't. There will be circuits where we can compete. Red Bull are still going to win the championships, right? I think that nobody is denying this, but there will be weekends, I am confident, where Ferrari are either the strongest car or they actually can compete. Speaking of that seat, though, at Mercedes, Fernando Alonso was very blunt on this. He was asked the question, would he join Mercedes? And he says, that's a very good question, but Mercedes is behind us right now, so it doesn't feel that attractive. And honestly, Alonso had a phenomenal weekend here. Like, that car, what he did with that car, sure, Stroll isn't the greatest benchmark, but I think you've got to say that Alonso just did such a killer job this weekend. Ended P6, of course, in a car that we believe is worse in the race than it is in qualifying situations, and Alonso's killing it. But yeah, again, they're ahead of Mercedes right now, so why would he leave to join a worse team? Let's be real. And this is potentially what Hamilton's thinking as well, because he had a tough race today. The pace at the end of the race from Hamilton was actually very good, and it's just confusing why this Mercedes is so up and down. But the hard tyre, the strategy was bad. Maybe he got some damage as well, but fundamentally it didn't really affect the race result. I mean, Russell only got P7 in the end. Hamilton was, of course, P9. Said nothing on the radio after the Grand Prix. He then said, yeah, the hard tyre was pretty bad. The medium was much better. In hindsight, it looks like we should have gone for the two mediums, but in general, the car was pretty bad today. This is, though, what he was reportedly saying. Now, I haven't found a video of this, unfortunately. Maybe one will emerge shortly, but he actually did say some words to Sky Sports. But talking to another journalist, he was basically asked the question, what's the race like? And he said it was okay. Then he was asked the question, basically, are you looking forward to being with them, Ferrari? Because they're faster. Like, are you jealous, effectively, of what Ferrari are currently achieving? And Hamilton said, do you have any better questions? And then walked off, and he didn't stick around any longer than that. So I can understand the frustration from Hamilton with the performance of the car, because yesterday the car was, sure, it's not like they qualified great, but the feeling was, no, Mercedes have found a step here. That's what Mercedes themselves were saying, and they seem to have put together a car that, like, if you watched Hamilton's lap yesterday, certainly in Q2 and even in Q3, the car was pretty hooked up. It looked like it was where it wanted to be. It looked like, to be honest, the car that Mercedes promised the drivers this year. A car that, sure, doesn't have the most downforce, but at least is a stable platform that you can have some confidence in. Today, I mean, it's very clear the performance just isn't there. And this is a circuit, Suzuka, which does exacerbate those differences. And maybe there are still some positives to take. But Hamilton was clearly not particularly impressed by this specific question on Ferrari's future. But fundamentally, it doesn't matter, because he will be there next year, and I'm sure that he's looking forward to that given the current state of things. Maybe there's still a chance that Mercedes turn things around. I wonder why Toto Wolff is saying things to quite this level. What do you guys think about this? Because do you believe that Toto actually believes this? Do you think Toto's now just like delusional, or what is going on? Because Toto Wolff seems to be very optimistic after this P7, P9 result. Like, how far have Mercedes fallen that this is the reality of the situation? But maybe he's saying this to try and attract other drivers. I don't know. Toto says, we had an atrocious first stint. We need to analyse why. Very good second and third stint. That's the positive we've taken from the race. It's live testing now for us. We've been on the back foot for 2 seasons. Now we're taking a different direction, and this is happening. Much better understanding of the car. Definitely much better. Lots more data that point us in the right direction, even if it's not reflected in the results. Can't wait to go to Shanghai. We need to start the weekend better, and then we're going to be killing it. And says as well, the experiments have worked. We have a clear direction. Even though the qualifying and race result doesn't reflect that, we aimed for a one-stop, then when it wasn't possible, we overmanaged the tyres probably, so cost them more time. From the moment we picked up speed on the similar stint legs, we were competitive. So, it's just interesting, right? The Toto has been yapping on about this for years now, and it doesn't really seem like there's any change to the fortunes of Mercedes, but maybe there's still something in it. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.